Watch the entire 2025 latest sci-fi thriller series, The Eternaut, in one go. This series is adapted from a classic Argentine graphic novel. The story begins on a night in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, where a group of ordinary people takes to the streets to protest against water and power outages. As everyone knows, the gap between rich and poor here is enormous. The income of the richest 10% of the population is 24 times that of the rest. In addition, so-called fairness and justice are all relative. For example, just across a wall, the wealthy neighborhood is brightly lit. The male lead, Juan, is considered to be part of the middle class. At this moment, he is going to visit an old friend. The friend owns an auto repair shop, but there don't seem to be many cars inside. Then, accompanied by a piece of classic music, Juan and a few friends start playing a card game. Their friendship has lasted over 30 years, and their relationship is very harmonious. At this point, please pay attention to Juan's three friends. They are the host, Tano, Lucas, and Russo. Suddenly, the power in the house goes out, interrupting everyone's fun. Juan takes out his phone to check, but strangely, the phone is dead and won't turn on, and it's the same for everyone in the room. While everyone is discussing and guessing, there's a sudden thudding sound coming from outside. It sounds like heavy objects hammering the ground. Tano's wife's scream breaks the silence, saying that someone downstairs suddenly fainted. Everyone immediately looks out the window, and outside, some white particles are drifting, looking exactly like winter snowflakes. This discovery surprises everyone because it's currently the hot summer season in Argentina. Even more unbelievable, cars on the street suddenly lose control one after another. The drivers seem to have lost consciousness. Everyone becomes nervous in this situation, and those who had planned to go downstairs all give up the idea. Seeing this, Tano tries to call the police using the landline, but on the other end of the phone is only a busy signal. All these strange phenomena show that something unusual is happening outside. At the very least, it is impossible for snow to suddenly fall during this season. Russo puts his hand on the glass. He immediately feels the cold. Thinking of the safety of his wife and children at home, he rushes out the door despite everyone trying to stop him. But just a few steps after Russo walks out, his body suddenly collapses. Obviously, the snowflakes outside are absolutely toxic. Once they enter the nasal cavity, the person will definitely fall to the ground and die. 10 minutes later, the temperature indoors drops sharply. Everyone puts on thick winter coats. Tano, who studied communications, boldly guesses. He thinks this may be related to a solar storm because only the electromagnetic pulses caused by such a storm can affect electronic devices. At this time, there's no sign of life on the entire street. The world, covered in white fog, is as dead silent as a ghost town. Suddenly, a light comes on in the building across the street. A sleepy neighbor appears at the window. He sees Tano and the others also standing at their window. At this moment, they are waving their arms, trying to make signals. Everyone is trying to warn him not to open the window, but he completely misunderstands their message. Just when he leans his head out the window, those drifting snowflakes take his life instantly. His elderly wife hears the noise and rushes over. She shakes her husband in confusion. But the next second, she also falls to the ground, dead at the window. This scene makes everyone feel helpless and sad. Juan also thinks of his own wife and daughter. As the sky outside gradually brightens, Juan decides to leave and return home. With the full support of his friends, he puts on thick winter clothing, along with a household mask and gloves. Everyone agrees that as long as the body is covered, there should be no problem. In the end, with the encouragement of his friends, Juan carefully walks outside. Just as everyone guessed, the deadly snowflakes do not harm him. It is already known that in addition to phones and electronic devices failing, all modern vehicles also cannot be started. Therefore, Juan can only rely on walking to return home. He looks at the body of his friend lying on the ground, then walks away with firm steps. The upcoming journey of adventure officially begins. A story about the end of the world and human nature also begins here. Not long after, Juan walks out of the neighborhood where his friends live, and the scene before his eyes shocks him. The entire city is shrouded in a chilling silence. Everywhere he looks, there are corpses. It is obvious that this mysterious snowstorm caught everyone off guard. In a situation without any preparation, humans never imagined that the snowflakes would be poisonous. Besides the visible accidents on the ground, what's even more bizarre is there are even corpses hanging on utility poles. It looks like the person on it was a maintenance worker who could only die in this posture at the end of his life. Overnight, the capital of Argentina fell just like that. Facing the biting cold wind and the deadly snowflakes, Juan could only wrap his coat tighter and keep walking. Although it was only 5 kilometers to get home, every step he took was extremely difficult. Along the way, the scenes were more or less the same, and Juan gradually stopped feeling afraid of what was around him. Just when he felt numb and emotionless, a sharp whistle suddenly entered his ears. Following the sound, he looked ahead and saw a soldier in uniform standing upright amidst the swirling snowflakes. Juan didn't know what the man meant, but when he turned around, the figure had disappeared. Without thinking too much, he continued on his way and chose a shortcut that avoided the main road. He didn't know how long he had been walking when suddenly an extremely terrifying train appeared in sight. The scene here was equally shocking. The corpses on both sides of the track said it all. It was clear that people had tried to escape from the train, but in the next second, their lives were frozen in place. Juan had thought only the city was affected, but unexpectedly, as long as there were snowflakes, there would be death. Just as he was about to leave, strange knocking sounds reached his ears. Juan was shocked at the people in front of him. It was obvious that they, too, had realized the snowflakes outside were poisonous. That's why they stayed inside the train car and didn't dare to come out. At this moment, a girl wrote the word "help" on the glass. It seemed she was desperate to leave this place. Out of a sense of humanity, Juan cautiously moved to the other side of the train car, and the part of the train that had not been invaded by snowflakes appeared before him. Inside, a group of survivors huddled together. They all spoke at once, trying to understand the situation outside. Because they couldn't take off the masks on their heads, they could only communicate through hand gestures. It was known that the group trapped here had been stuck for over 6 hours. They had witnessed every person who dared to step off the train. So far, no one had been able to leave. Now the temperature inside the train car was already close to freezing. But at this moment, there was no solution in sight. Looking at the group of desperate survivors in front of him, Juan said he would notify rescue once he found the organization. After speaking, he crouched down to get some supplies, but in his backpack he suddenly found a pistol that hadn't been there before. He immediately realized it was from his friend Tano. Clearly, Tano understood better than anyone how complicated human nature could be in an apocalypse.
Hey, where are you going?
I'm going to get help, I promise.
Ignoring the desperate pleas of the people behind him, Juan slung his bag over his shoulder and left the train car. He didn't have the ability to worry about whether these people could survive. Besides, his wife and daughter's lives were still uncertain. Soon, he arrived at the residential complex where he lived. As he had guessed, it was full of corpses lying on the ground. He entered the apartment building through a door that had been broken open. Juan saw a dead dog still wearing a helmet, which showed that people here had likely tried to protect themselves. Following the dim light, he went up to the 18th floor. Juan saw that the hallway was full of survivors. He didn't bother greeting the neighbors and went straight to his own home. At that moment, the furniture inside was toppled and messy, as if it had been ransacked by thieves. Since his wife and daughter weren't home, did that mean they had already perished? Just then, a noise came from inside the apartment. Juan stepped out and saw a strange man. He rushed up to ask why he had entered his home, and pressed him, asking if he knew where the people in the house had gone. The man hurriedly explained that he was a volunteer from the apartment building, and that he was under orders to search for some medicine. During the argument, a neighbor walked in to help explain. They could prove that everything was true. Juan, realizing it was a misunderstanding, let go of the man's arm. But the man looked down at the back of Juan's hand. The source was Juan's wife, Elena. She first drove the neighbor out of the apartment. Then she delivered a piece of bad news. It turned out that she had sent a text message to her husband last night, saying that their daughter had gone to a classmate's house for a sleepover. At that time, Juan had been playing cards with his friends, so he had no idea their daughter wasn't home. Since the deadly snowflakes fell, Elena hadn't received any messages at all. After hearing this, Juan flew into a rage, because his wife didn't even know where that classmate lived. Outside the window, the blizzard was still raging, and the one they cared about most was already missing. After sorting out their emotions, the two of them decided to go to their daughter's school to search for clues. But just as Juan opened the door, he suddenly ran into all the survivors in the building. Clearly, the man from earlier had spread the word. Everyone was curious about how Juan had managed to get outside. There was a strong desire shining in everyone's eyes. Every person wanted to know the secret. Juan frankly said that he didn't have the ability to resist the snowflakes. He believed the snowflakes were only toxic while floating in the air, but after landing, they would automatically lose their effect. This explanation didn't put the crowd at ease. The man leading the group even blocked the way. He knew very clearly that Juan must be hiding a mask, so he wanted to requisition Juan's mask on the spot, in the name of a temporary neighborhood committee. It turned out the water pipes in the building had already frozen. and all the residents urgently needed to go out to find a water source. This statement made Juan extremely anxious, so he suddenly pulled out the pistol. Juan only wanted to find his daughter before making any other decisions. Under pressure, the man and the others could only watch as the couple left. However, just as Juan had reached downstairs, the man came after him with a gun. As the tense chase grew closer, Juan and his wife ran into a room on the second floor. Soon the man brought people and blocked the door. It was only a matter of time before they broke through. Juan's original plan was to go find his daughter alone, but now he had to take his wife with him. Seeing the people outside about to break in, Juan put the only mask on his wife and explained some safety instructions to her. When his wife jumped from the second floor onto the car on the ground, the couple finally breathed a sigh of relief. Juan didn't know how to deal with those people, but the plastic bag on the ground gave him an idea. Just as the door was completely broken open, the man rushed into the room with a few followers.
Going to defend yourself with that?
The deadly snowflakes scared them into fleeing in panic, while Juan jumped down from the second floor with the plastic bag. This kind of movement was very intense, and the physical exertion made his breathing extremely heavy. It seemed he had still underestimated it. Exposed protection couldn't withstand the extreme cold, and the plastic bag quickly became covered with frost. He staggered for less than 100 meters, then collapsed in the snow due to severe lack of oxygen. When Juan regained consciousness, he found himself lying in a car, surrounded by people wearing masks. Then, a familiar voice came from the driver's seat. It turned out to be Tano, who had saved him, and next to him was his wife, who had just left. It turned out that Tano had tried to start his old Ford car at home, and accidentally discovered that only cars could still operate. They first went to the fire station to find more masks, then turned around and came here. Juan felt very lucky to have been saved, but even more fortunate to have such a great friend. In just a short while, the car returned to Tano's repair shop. This time they not only acquired a large number of masks, but also unexpectedly gathered some weapons. No matter how things would unfold later, holding weapons was definitely the right thing to do. Juan and his wife went upstairs to rest briefly, then immediately planned to go to their daughter's school to search for clues. Half an hour later, the couple walked to their daughter's school. But the place was completely empty, with not a soul in sight. From a class display stand, they found a photo. In it were their daughter and some of her classmates. His wife pointed to one of them. That was the one they were looking for. Next, they just needed to find that classmate's home address. To make full use of their time, Juan went nearby to look for a working car, while Elena went to the administration office to search for student records. At first, both of them were progressing smoothly, but just as Elena was flipping through the files, she suddenly heard a noise from outside. Realizing there were other people, Elena stepped out to search. She eventually discovered the sound was coming from a door that was blocked. Through the gap in the door, it looked like a boy was locked inside. He appeared very angry. At that moment, Juan returned after completing his task. Elena told him what had happened.
Come ti chiami, ragazzi?
E tu chi sei? Chiedi la tua madre, come mi chiamo?
A slap made the boy calm down instantly. He explained that he had been locked up by classmates as a cruel prank, and he had already been stuck here for a whole day and night. Juan told him that no one was coming to rescue him because outside was a deadly snowfall, and everyone had died without even knowing what was happening. The boy rushed out wanting to check, but the scene in front of him quickly made him stop. On the playground lay a pile of corpses. They were the very classmates who had locked him up. Elena walked over and explained how it all started. Then she took out the photo and asked the boy. He just glanced at it and immediately recognized that the classmate was his sister. Such a coincidence made the couple feel relieved. It seemed that an unintentional act of kindness had brought them hope. Without delay, they got in the car. The three of them quickly arrived at the boy's house. Juan told the boy to stay in the car for now, while he and his wife went in to look for someone. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. Juan directly kicked the door open. This scene surprised the boy. He couldn't help but feel something was wrong. Juan called out his daughter's name, but the empty house was silent. He followed the hallway leading to the backyard, and in an instant, Juan felt suffocated. By the poolside, 8 people had collapsed on the dining table in various postures. Apparently, they were having a meal outdoors when disaster struck. Juan held back his grief and slowly walked over to inspect. He lifted a girl's head to check, but found she was neither his daughter nor the one they were looking for. He immediately thought the boy might have lied, because the truth was already right in front of them. Elena stopped the boy who was grieving. They were already mentally prepared for situations like this. Later on, the boy lying in Elena's arms developed a high fever, perhaps from being exposed to the cold for too long. After discussing it together, the couple decided to take the boy with them. Besides, he still hadn't told them the address of his sister's home. An angry Juan was also helpless. He hadn't expected that he would be led around by the boy. On the way, he spotted a pharmacy by the roadside, so Juan immediately got out of the car to look for fever medicine. Although he didn't like a boy like this, his actions were still those of a kind person. Elena settled the boy in an empty room, then began searching for medicine, together with her husband. At that moment, there was a sudden loud knocking at the front door of the pharmacy. Looking closely, it was a pregnant woman outside. She said her water had broken and she urgently needed help, so she begged Juan and Elena to show some compassion. Elena began to sympathize, but Juan still didn't want to get involved. Ignoring her husband's objection, Elena opened the door without permission. But just as the pregnant woman was let in, she suddenly burst into wild laughter.
Don't move, Grandpa, or I'll shoot you.
Give me the
Take
car
it easy,
keys.
man.
Wait, we were helping you. Don't point that.
Shut the fuck up! Give me the car keys, asshole!
There's no
Are
need for
you
that.
deaf?
Take it easy.
Come on.
Relax. No need to get worked up.
Then the robbers stole Juan's car keys and locked him and Elena in a room. Fortunately, the feverish boy heard everything. He waited until the robbers drove away, then opened the door from the outside. Moments later, the three of them dragged their exhausted bodies through the wind and snow. Although there were cars parked everywhere along the road, none of them was the car they were looking for. As they passed the train station from before, Juan suddenly stopped walking. He looked around cautiously and found that the corpses that had once filled the tracks were now completely gone. Only backpacks, shoes, and other items were left on the ground. The barbed wire around the train station seemed to have been ripped apart by some kind of force, and judging by the break, it clearly wasn't man-made. Juan followed the tracks and kept searching. He found the train full of survivors from earlier that morning. The corpses there were also gone, as if they had all evaporated in an instant. Juan boarded the train to take a look, but all the bodies he remembered were gone now. He walked through the corridor to the carriage where the survivors had been trapped, and the scene before his eyes was even more shocking. Not only were there still no corpses, but there were also traces of sticky gelatinous slime left on the seats. It wasn't hard to imagine the survivors had definitely not been rescued. Maybe they had encountered something even worse. That night, the man and woman who had robbed Juan during the day drove into a gas station. The man got out wearing a mask to refuel, while the woman stayed inside the car listening to music. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from behind the man. He raised his flashlight and shone it toward the noise, and in the next second, the man died in a scream. At that moment, the woman inside the car was listening to music, but soon she felt the car shake violently. She thought it was a prank from her boyfriend outside, not realizing that she was about to face death. The next morning, Juan got the address from the boy. To find his daughter, he decided to go alone. Tano tried to persuade him to give up. He believed the chances of survival were just too low. Juan didn't want to say more. He directly asked if he could borrow the car. After hearing this, Tano didn't agree. The two friends of 30 years ended up having an argument because of it. Afterwards, Juan left Tano's house on foot. He would have to pass through 17 blocks to reach his destination. If he relied solely on walking, half a day would be enough. But just as Juan hadn't walked far, a red car stopped by the roadside. When he looked closely at the driver, Juan realized it was Tano.
I'm not gonna let some fucking snowstorm ruin a 40-year-long friendship.
38.
With just a few simple words, the two of them made up again. From then on, a more dangerous journey began. Along the way, the surroundings were very strange. From start to finish, they didn't see a single corpse, but broken car shells were scattered all over the ground. Not long after, the car was forced to stop. The road ahead was blocked by hundreds of vehicles, twisted doors and shattered windshields. It clearly wasn't caused by humans. Just as the two were trying to find another route, the roar of engines suddenly came from the distance. Soon, dozens of trucks filled with soldiers slowly drove past. The officer leading the group also saw Juan and Tano. He warned them that the entire city had been placed under military lockdown, so Juan and Tano must return to where they came from, otherwise they too would be fired upon. Watching the backs of the departing troops, Juan decided to follow the convoy and break through the blockade. But this risky move was quickly discovered by the soldiers, who then began shooting madly toward them. Sharp gunshots pierced the sky. Tano began reversing the car, but because of the slippery snow, the car flipped over. At that moment, a disturbance suddenly came from the other side of the bridge. Then a swarm of alien creatures surged forward like a tide. The overwhelming number of them threw the soldiers into despair. One after another, they were grabbed by the giant bugs, and in a chorus of screams, they became a feast for the monsters. These alien creatures looked like beetles. Each one was as big as a small car. Human bullets couldn't harm them at all. Their thick shells were like bulletproof glass, and at that moment, Juan, hiding in the distance, witnessed everything. No one had expected that this was actually an alien invasion. After the swarm left, Juan and Tano came outside and picked up the assault rifles dropped by the soldiers, then continued walking along the icy road. The two of them found a large number of nests in the city square. Before they had time to think about what was going on, a sharp insect cry suddenly came from straight ahead. The two quickly hid in a corner in panic. Soon they saw a giant bug dragging a corpse. Even more terrifying, the giant insect dug a hole between two nests, then dragged its prey underground. Seeing this, the two of them wanted to retreat quickly, but Juan slipped and crashed into a wall. The sound instantly broke the surrounding silence, and dense crawling noises came from the hole.
Damn it!
Juan fired a shot and hit the bug's head, miraculously killing it. But before the two could catch their breath, the ground beneath their feet began to shake violently again. At the critical moment, a figure appeared not far away. Seeing this, Juan and Tano fled in panic. At the same time, strange noises came from behind. It turned out that the bugs were devouring the corpses of their own kind. It seemed they had gone mad, eating anything in sight. The two of them followed the footprints in the snow, running all the way, eventually arriving at a church resembling a bell tower. At this time, the heavy iron doors were tightly shut. No matter how hard they knocked, there was no response. Just as the swarm was about to pounce, a burst of scorching flames exploded over them. They looked up. It turned out someone upstairs was throwing Molotov cocktails. The roaring wall of fire temporarily blocked the attack, and Juan and Tano took the opportunity to enter the church. Following the spiral staircase, they came to a secret room. They saw more than a dozen survivors gathered there. After a brief rest, someone told Juan that those monsters came from the sky. If he didn't believe it, he could go to the top floor window to see for himself. Juan then saw a terrifying sight. The oppressive view before him almost took his breath away. In the pitch-black night sky, countless red streaks of light like meteors pierced through the clouds. Each streak meant the arrival of another wave of insect creatures. It was not until this moment that Juan realized how slim the hope was for his daughter's survival. Several hours later, Juan learned that the people here were planning to leave because the food shortage was becoming urgent. At midnight, during a short gap when the swarm returned to their nests, the group of more than 10 quietly left the church. A strange atmosphere filled the street, and red meteors continued to fall from the sky. No one knew how much time had passed. The group moved along the walls until they reached a bridge. They needed to cross through an abandoned bus there and then step into a hidden passage. But just as everyone was moving stealthily, the surrounding swarm suddenly became agitated. To help a slow-moving mother and daughter, Juan was unfortunately trapped inside the bus. Through the shattered window, he saw several giant insects crawling back and forth outside. One of them suddenly stopped. It seemed to have detected prey inside the bus. At this critical moment, a deep bell rang through the sky. It turned out that two elderly people who stayed in the church used their last strength to ring the bell. Hearing the sound, the giant insects all turned around and surged toward the church like a tidal wave. Juan held his breath, hiding in the bus. He had to wait until the swarm had passed before he could come out. Just as the group passed through the elevated bridge's tunnel, inside the church, the bugs were building stairs. It was obvious that these creatures had high intelligence. At least, it proved they were capable of thinking. At this moment, the two old men sat calmly in their room on the top floor, gazing at the approaching swarm without fear. At the final second, one of them tossed his cigarette onto the gasoline-soaked floor. At the same time, all the survivors had finally passed through the tunnel. They had finally escaped the swarm's pursuit. Someone pointed toward the sky. In the distance, the church had turned into a burning torch. Everyone silently watched the glowing light, knowing that the old men had bought them time. After that, Juan followed Tano back home. However, just as he went upstairs to check, he was shocked to see his wife holding their daughter. Juan walked up and touched his daughter's face. He couldn't believe how his wife had found their daughter. Elena told him she hadn't gone out. Their daughter had come with other survivors to find her. Later on, after revealing the truth about the alien insect invasion to everyone, they all decided to head for the military-designated shelter. It's worth mentioning that Lucas did not leave. He wanted to stay at Tano's repair shop and wait for news. It was now known that communication equipment still couldn't be used, but many vehicles could be started. The scenes along the way offered a bit of comfort. There were a few survivors walking here and there on the streets. At this moment, the highway looked like a frozen dragon. Countless cars stretched all the way to the edge of visibility. There wasn't a single living person in sight on the entire road. No one knew where all those people had gone. Several hours later, a brightly lit supermarket suddenly appeared by the roadside. Unlike the dead silence of the city, this place was lively and bustling. Juan and the others immediately decided to stay and soon learned the basic situation here. Someone said this was the largest gathering site nearby, and the food stored in the warehouse could support hundreds of people. After enjoying a long-awaited hot meal, Juan no longer thought about heading to the shelter. Early the next morning, a wave of commotion broke out. Out of curiosity, Juan followed the crowd toward the entrance. He then saw that the days-long blizzard had stopped. For the first time in a while, sunlight broke through the clouds, spreading a halo across the snowy landscape. This sudden improvement in weather made everyone ecstatic. It felt like a glimmer of hope had appeared. But just as the crowd was cheering with joy, Tano noticed something terrifying. The compass had completely reversed, which meant more strange events were coming. At that moment, a car suddenly stopped in front of the supermarket. 3 masked, armed individuals jumped out of the vehicle and immediately opened fire on the crowd. Their indiscriminate killing showed no trace of humanity. The entire plaza quickly fell into chaos. The survivors had no choice but to scatter in all directions. This immediately triggered Juan's fury. Holding a weapon, he decided to fight back with Tano. In just a short time, 2 of the attackers were shot dead. The last one fled the scene in panic. Juan lifted the mask of one of them, only to see that it was a middle-aged woman. Around her neck hung a string of children's pendants. In a daze, Juan recalled the scene before the storm. Back then, he had run into a woman at the mall, and she had worn the same type of pendant. This discovery left Juan confused. Why would an ordinary-looking woman attack civilians? Could there be a deeper conspiracy behind this? Moments later, 3 military trucks approached from the distance. They were filled with soldiers and several survivors. What surprised everyone was that Lucas was among them. He said he had drunk a little the night before, but after waking up, he somehow found himself on the highway. Luckily, a patrol squad had spotted him at the time, so he was eventually brought here. After talking, they learned that the group was exactly the military unit Juan had originally planned to join. Their name was Reuniting Military Camp, and it was said that most of the nearby survivors had already gone there. Considering that this place was no longer safe, Juan immediately decided to leave with the convoy. Since their vehicle had been damaged during the ambush, the group had no choice but to ride in the military's transport truck. Meanwhile, a few kilometers away from the supermarket, the masked person who had escaped slipped into a tunnel. Creepy as it was, the dark, damp interior was packed with alien insects. Even stranger, these vicious bugs didn't attack him. Instead, they made way and opened a path for him. Seeing this made people feel confused. Was this so-called disaster really an alien invasion, or was it a conspiracy created by humans themselves? Later, the group arrived at the powerful Reuniting military camp. The base continuously broadcasted messages via radio and promised shelter for everyone. As of now, the base had already taken in thousands of survivors, and its scale and influence continued to grow. To give more people the ability to fight, the military was forming new defensive forces. Most of the young men joined the training squads, while the women were assigned to rear medical teams. Juan's daughter was not content with this. She longed to pick up a weapon like her father and fight back. At the same time, Tano was summoned to the command center. It turned out the officers had learned he used to be a communications soldier, and the base just happened to have a radio that urgently needed an operator. They were now preparing to broadcast from the city center, so survivors across the country could know the shelter's location. For some reason, Tano declined the task, saying he didn't feel well. Later, Lucas came over after hearing what happened. He wanted to persuade his friend to reconsider the military's request. After all, this mission was honorable and sacred. Juan agreed with this. He also believed Tano should help the military. After some deep thought, Tano eventually chose to compromise. Juan and Lucas also joined the military camp. A few days later, the military organized dozens of volunteers to head for the city center. They had to pass through insect-controlled zones, and reach the highest point to install the radio system. Tano was in charge of operations, while Juan and Lucas were responsible for cover. On the way, they saw several bombers piercing through the clouds. The deafening roar filled everyone with excitement. It meant the military was striking back and that humanity had never given up hope for survival. As the sharp whistle of a train siren rang out, a train packed with volunteers rushed toward the insect swarm. With an earth-shaking crash, the piled-up cars were scattered, and the train forced open a path. But the joy of success didn't last long. The driver soon realized the train was heavily damaged in the crash. They now had to continue on foot, but such noise was bound to attract the swarm. Luckily, the target building was only a few hundred meters away. Juan and the others quickly huddled together and retreated. On the way, they saw a crashed bomber. What was puzzling was the insect creatures clearly had no flying ability, so who had shot the aircraft down? After reaching the target building, the leader divided the team into 3 groups. The tech group carried the equipment to the rooftop to install the transmitter. The combat group built defenses around the perimeter. And the recon group went to investigate the bomber they passed by. At this point, Juan was a little confused. They had passed right through the heart of the insect nest, yet hadn't encountered any resistance. Soon, the recon group arrived near the crashed bomber. From the external markings, it was clear the aircraft was a Peruvian Air Force bomber. Everyone knew Peru was more than 3,000 kilometers from Argentina. So why was this bomber here? After continued investigation, they found several air bombs stored in the cabin. According to the accompanying military map, the bomber's intended target was the capital's central stadium. The few people who read the documents were completely stunned. They couldn't make sense of what was going on. Elsewhere, in a room on the top floor of the building, Tano finally finished calibrating all the equipment. A communications officer wearing a headset took a deep breath, then began broadcasting to the outside world. The message gave the exact coordinates of Wuyue military camp and invited anyone who wished to come and seek shelter. After completing the setup, the tech group switched the transmitter to auto broadcast. But just as they were about to leave, someone suddenly noticed the distant stadium. In the dark night, that massive structure was flickering with an eerie blue light. Juan immediately proposed sending someone to investigate. But after hearing the proposal, the leader showed a troubled expression. The team that had been sent earlier to investigate the bomber still hadn't returned, and they didn't have enough manpower to take another risk. At midnight, after completing the mission, a few people started a casual card game. But Lucas's behavior was extremely strange. He kept losing round after round, and even made frequent mistakes with the basic rules of bridge. While everyone was growing suspicious, Lucas suddenly went berserk. He pulled out a knife and stabbed one of the players, then bolted out the door and fled the scene.
Your friends!
Juan and Tano chased after him, eventually cornering Lucas at the edge of the rooftop. Under the dim light, Lucas looked toward the distant stadium, then turned around and jumped.
No!
The sight left Juan utterly confused. He couldn't help but wonder if his friend had been possessed. When Juan and Tano reached the ground floor, they ran into patrol soldiers from the combat team. Just as Juan was about to ask for help, one of the soldiers suddenly shouted to his comrades, "Surround and eliminate!" Dozens of people came rushing over. Realizing something was very wrong, Juan fled in panic, still unable to figure out where all these people had come from. After regrouping, the quick-thinking Tano analyzed the situation. He feared this entire disaster had been man-made from the beginning, and that this mission was actually a trap. If they dared to speculate, perhaps the insect swarm was some kind of military experiment. After hearing that, Juan immediately made arrangements. Tano and the communications officer would drive back to the base, while he and another companion would go investigate the stadium. After separating, Juan and his companion quickly arrived at Riverbed Stadium. There, they witnessed many terrifying scenes. Strange humans wandered the area. Some walked silently like sleepwalkers. Others fired their guns in a mechanical fashion. Even more unbelievable, the fierce alien insects roamed among the people, and yet both sides maintained a bizarre peace. When Juan reached the top rooftop of the stadium, the sight before him stunned him in place. Under the crimson light of the insect's atmospheric descent, the entire arena was filled with lines of humans and insect creatures, as if they were puppets being controlled by strings. All their faces were turned toward the center of the stadium, as if waiting for the arrival of some supreme being. Suddenly, the scene struck Juan with a strong sense of déjà vu, as if he had seen this before. The feeling was so overwhelming that he became dazed. Even the companion beside him looked like a comrade from his blurred memories. There was no time to think further. An even more horrifying sight followed. A dazzling blue light erupted from a pavilion in the stadium. Then, a monstrous being behind it all appeared. As the light gradually took shape, a giant hand with 17 fingers slowly emerged. Below, all the humans raised their heads in unison, their eyes dull and soulless. Only at this moment did Juan finally understand the ultimate truth behind everything. Everything was a scheme by alien beings. To fully take over humanity's territory, they first brought down a deadly snowstorm to clear the area, then unleashed insect swarms to wipe out the remaining population. Because the human population was too massive, they created the so-called Reuniting camp. That place was never truly a refuge. It was a carefully constructed trap by alien civilization. The base broadcasted messages to lure in more survivors, and even controlled masked attackers to carry out acts of terror. All of this was meant to build the illusion of Reuniting camp as a symbol of safety. On the surface, Reuniting camp looked like humanity's final hope, but in reality, it was a sinister transformation center. This explained all the strange events before, and no wonder a Peruvian warplane would show up on a bombing mission. Even more terrifying, at that moment, Juan's daughter was undergoing training there. Clearly, she was going to become one of the next puppet soldiers of the alien race. Realizing everything, Juan felt a chill all over his body. The horrifying truth left him powerless to resist, and with that, the series came to an end. After watching this show, people are left with an indescribable sense of suffocation. The director's metaphors clearly reflect real-world parallels. Perhaps the so-called deadly snowstorm is a sign that our social hierarchy is about to collapse.